When you look at the comments the Prime Minister made on Sunday Agenda yesterday, I want to get your reactions to them. He says that Australia's political system has changed substantially. We live in different times from when past referendums have been held. This is the first referendum that's been held this century. The time has come. He seems quite sanguine about dealing with the Liberal Party and National Party opposition to this. Is there a risk here that you've misread the political mood around this issue, David Littleproud?
No, not from a National Party's perspective. I can't speak for anyone else, but I think everyone comes with genuine intent about constitutional recognition. It's just that the National Party comes from a different lens. We look at this from lived experience of the mistakes of the past that we're going to revisit with a representative body. We've got over 1,000 Indigenous representative bodies now giving advice to government, and we're going to put in another one that'll add another layer of bureaucracy, meaning bigger bureaucracy, not a better one. All we're saying is that while they're trying to put in place a regional body, that regional body in practical experience and in practical reality will be a lot different in regional Australia as what it will be in capital cities. Well and good, this might work for Redfern, but the most disadvantage for Indigenous Australians isn't in Redfern. It's actually in rural and remote areas. And the representative that will represent them on this body, along with the other 1,000 Indigenous groups that go and give advice, will be thousands of kilometres, representing hundreds of different communities well apart and having no real community connection at all. So this is where the failure of the past and the way in which the Nationals look at this through a unique lens that we say to city Australians seek to understand the experience the Nationals have in this. We don't come from this with any malice. We come from this with lived experience about what will work and what won't work. And that's before you even get to the lawyers at 100 paces and what may end up in the High Court. In something that's meant to bring us together, I would have thought the Prime Minister would have made sure that it would have brought everyone together rather than there being parts of our society that are very concerned about this in the practical experience of a representative body, but also in terms of what could end up in the courts. Because if it ends up in the courts, this will tear a country apart.
How damaging would it be for the opposition, though, if you've got Liberal frontbenchers, some campaigning for the no vote, which is what Peter Dutton has said he will do, but others really holding back, if anything, leaving it to others to make the case, and backbenchers going to vote yes?
Well, I can't speak for the Liberal Party. The National Party is its own sovereign party. We got to this position 6 months ago, predicated on the fact that it was another representative body. Now, if the Prime Minister had wanted to come and say, let's give constitutional recognition, then that's a different question our party room would explore and I'm sure would support. But we will continue on our pathway of giving the practical experience, the lived experience of what happens in rural and remote communities where the disadvantage is. So what the Liberal Party does and their members is up to them. We've made it very clear, as is the culture of the National Party, that every member is free to vote as they want and how they campaign. That's the beauty of the diversity of the National Party room. But our room is united in our position in where we're going to go with this, just because of the lived experience we have.
When you warn about, you warned about the impact of this referendum in terms of dividing Australians. Do politicians need to be careful around the language that's been used in this debate?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's also those in the yes and no case. I mean, Noel Pearson has been very vehement against me, Jacinta Price, and now Peter Dutton. That's not a mature way to have a conversation with the Australian people about a very serious topic. And I think that Jacinta Price made some comments around Linda Burney to start with, and I made it very clear to Jacinta that wasn't how this debate should be undertaken, and she hasn't since. And I think we need to make sure that we have a respectful debate about what we're asking the country to make a very personal decision about. And that's why the Nationals will be very mature. Our tone has been very mature about our lived experience of representing rural and remote communities and how we fear that we are going to repeat the mistakes of the past, and that potentially this could split our country because of the ingrained way in which the voice will be given the powers to actually give advice above any other Australian. There's a pure tenet that the National Party has always believed in, that all 26 million Australians are equal, no matter your race, no matter your religion. And you all get a voice through the Australian Parliament, the 226 voices that are there now. And proudly, our country has elected 11 Indigenous Australians, not to represent Indigenous Australians, but to represent all 26 million Australians. That's how far this nation's come. This is something we should celebrate rather than to tear down. We should celebrate the fact that our nation has come so far, and that if we wanted to go further in constitutional recognition, in saying a statement of fact, Indigenous Australians were here first, but we are better having been together, and we will be better sticking together and using the institutions that have served us so well as a country. That's all the Nationals are saying, and that's what we'll continue to say respectfully, and we hope that everyone else respectfully is able to enter this debate in the same way, in the same maturity. No need to call names. It's just about making sure that the difference of ideas in this great democracy that over 100,000 Australians have lost their lives defending is protected as the custodians of that. As the next generation, we do that respectfully in whatever conversation, whether it be in a general election or whether it be in a referendum.
You spoke about the progress that's been made in terms of the electoral success of First Nations people, and that's true, and let's hope we see more of that. I guess the challenge, though, is that, and I'll put this to you in the way that advocates of the voice would say it, is that what we've done to this point in terms of closing the gap hasn't worked, so why not try this?
Well, you're not just giving it a go and walking away, you're putting it in your constitution. So it's not just have a crack and then walk away and throw it away. It's there for perpetuity until there's another referendum. I think we've also got to remember that we have closed the gap in many areas and in many parts of the country. But where the gap hasn't been closed and where it's the most disadvantaged is in the rural and remote areas that we represent. We've already put over $5.3 billion into Indigenous procurement programs, employing thousands of Indigenous Australians in Indigenous businesses across this country. 97% of Indigenous children now go to kindergarten, but there are still failings. But those failings, in many ways, are concentrated into geographical areas. And what we're concerned about as Nationals is the lived experience of having a representative body called ATSIC before. And what happened was, because of the vast tyranny of distance, of someone trying to devise a program across hundreds of different communities for that specific community, just doesn't work. We've seen it. Where it works is where you empower the local elder with the local council, and you empower them with their own design, their own programs. That's how it works, and that's the failing of a bigger bureaucracy, not a better bureaucracy, of governments of all persuasions. And I don't knock the government for what they're trying to do. They come to this with genuine intent, as do we. But what we see is the practical experience. And I know many city Australians will find it hard to understand, but we are talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of square kilometres, representing hundreds of different communities. In Sydney, you are talking in some places where it's less than 100 square kilometres, where you can get services quite easily to. Where you can inject in a needs basis at a local community quite easily. But we are talking totally different. There are two different Australias out there. And I just say to those metropolitan Australians who are thinking about this, look through the lens of the lived experience of the National Party, and particularly those Indigenous Australians out there, where you need to empower the local elder at the community, not across the region. That will not shift the dial in closing the gap, and that's what we are genuine about closing, particularly for those people that we represent, where the most disadvantage is.
Just finally, the Prime Minister told Sky News at the weekend as well that he has spoken to a number of well-known, high-profile sports people, that he believes that the codes, AFL, NRL and others will get on board as well. Do you recognise that towards the end of the year, when the referendum's held, likely in October, that there will be a lot of momentum in terms of some of those iconic sporting codes and likely to have a fair bit of influence in the debate along the way?
Well, this is a deeply personal decision for Australians to make, not for corporate Australia or sporting bodies to throw their moral compass across this country. This is a decision that Australians should have the information in a respectful way to make their determination and look through the lens of all arguments to make sure that they've made that informed decision. It's anyone's prerogative to come forward and to put a point of view in this country. That's the beautiful thing about living in this great democracy we're in. But I don't think that having corporates and sporting groups try and impose their will, their righteous view from some boardroom in Sydney on Australians, particularly when they have very little experience, very limited lived experience outside a capital city in what is actually happening in these remote communities, because my members, the National Party members that go to Canberra, live in these communities. And in fact, some of them have had the lived experience of some of the challenges these communities face personally. So I think Australians will make their own determination. And, when you've got corporate Australia, the likes of banks coming forward and try and impose their moral will on the Australian people, God help us. I mean, this is the mob that are actually taking away banking services in rural and remote communities that would help to disadvantage Indigenous Australians. So I hardly think that they're the moral yardstick that we should be looking at as the one where we should get our moral compass from. This is a deeply personal decision for each Australian to make, and we just say to them, look through the lens of what we are trying to achieve here. If it wasn't just solely about constitutional recognition, I think you would have a unanimous vote, but when you try to intertwine something that reaches much farther than that, then that is a challenge about the equities of this country and where we want to go forward as this country, of what we've achieved, but what we need to achieve together in making sure no one is disadvantaged in this country.